Really pleased to be here for Network Days. I've met some of you before. There's some familiar faces in Cleveland or in New York and other places where we've had Network Days. And in the past, I sort of prepared a PowerPoint presentation that goes over the Foundation Center's strategic objectives, talks about sort of where we've been, where we're going. Some of you have seen that. I think probably by today you've seen lots of PowerPoints and had lots of presentations. So actually I'm going to talk much more informally today, just some sort of off-the-cuff remarks, and then hopefully give you a chance to just make statements, ask questions, and have a conversation, because I'd really like to understand what's on your mind. So I want to start my remarks actually in Australia. And about a month ago, I was in Australia, and the Foundation Center had been invited to go there by a group called Philanthropy Australia. Philanthropy Australia is essentially the membership association of foundations in Australia, sort of like the Council on Foundations in this country. We were invited by them and by a group of research institutes in Swinburne, which is actually in Melbourne, and in Sydney. And the reason we were invited, I went with a colleague, was to really talk about transparency. Australia is a very wealthy country. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but it's a very wealthy country. It's a very beautiful country. It's extremely far away from anywhere. It takes a very long time to get there. But it has a growing philanthropic culture. There's a man named Andrew Forrest who just signed the Giving Pledge, together with Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett. And a very wealthy Australian has just left his estate to create a foundation with $3 billion, making it the largest endowed foundation in Australia. It's also interesting from our perspective because Australia is, perhaps because of its Anglo-Saxon roots, is a grant-giving culture. One of the things you fast learn when you get outside the borders of the United States is that most countries' foundations don't make grants. So the whole notion that there are sort of two types of beings in the world, grant makers and grant seekers, breaks down when you get outside the borders of the U.S. A lot of foundations actually operate their own programs. But in Australia, they actually make grants. And one of the big problems is you have a growing practice of making grants. You have a very robust nonprofit community, and you have no transparent information, no publicly available information about grants. So you don't have a foundation directory online. The people that invited us would like to get there someday to have something like a foundation directory online, and they're very much focused now on glass pockets, which is something you've seen that the Foundation Center does, which is pushing the whole notion of foundation transparency. So I gave a talk, a keynote address at their annual meeting on this unbelievably beautiful presentation hall in Melbourne with the biggest screen I've ever seen in my life. It sort of made TED Talks look like child's play. It was huge. And they were absolutely transfixed when I used foundation maps, which I think you had a demonstration of, to take them from the world to Australia, to Melbourne, and to a street corner in Melbourne where there's an organization called the International Detention Coalition. And the International Detention Coalition is a nonprofit organization that defends the rights of immigrants that are being held in detention centers around the world. And the audience, first of all, was just sort of amazed that somebody from another country could come and zero in on a street corner and show them a grantee of foreign foundations in their own backyard. But even more amazed because none of them even knew the organization existed. And it really drove home the power of the data and the information. And the upshot of this is that a group of foundations in Australia have decided that the best way to promote transparency there is not to sort of pressure foundations to be more transparent because it's a good thing. That's like getting your kids to eat spinach, right? But to pick an issue that they care about. And so the issue they care about and want to work on and are willing to make their data available for is foundation funding for Indigenous Australians, which is the Aboriginal population. The Aboriginal population of Australia is see if I get this right, it's the world's oldest population that has continuously inhabited a territory. They've been moved around, but not near as much as a lot of other populations. It's a very ancient population, a huge historic debt to the Aboriginal population in Australia. And this is an area that both Australian philanthropists and actually US and European philanthropists have invested a lot of money. So we're going to be building for Australian foundations and grant makers and nonprofits a site that looks very much like some of the other sites you've seen, things like WASH funders, BMA funders, and other things the Foundation Center has built. I want to turn a little bit to Nigeria. I wasn't in Nigeria recently. I used to spend a lot of time in Nigeria when I worked for the Ford Foundation, and Lagos was one of the offices that I had oversight for, but I quickly learned that nobody has oversight for Lagos. Lagos is an amazing place and an unbelievably vibrant, big, noisy, energetic city. Traveled quite a bit in the country, also to the north of the country and the south of the country in that work. But just thinking also about the potential power of this kind of information in the setting of Nigeria. Nigeria is not Australia. It has a very different philanthropic culture, obviously. But it also has a philanthropic culture that's growing. You have some very wealthy, high net worth individuals in Nigeria that have created foundations. A lot of those foundations are still trying to figure out what they're going to do. Quite a few of them are operating their own programs and sort of doing big signature programs. But there's all indications that, like in any other part of the world where there's growing high net worth income, that there will be a growth in philanthropy. And what there is in Nigeria is an incredibly active and talented and combative and resilient NGO community, a nonprofit community. And if any of you think you suffer challenges in your daily work and are having a really bad day, call one of your colleagues in Nigeria and ask them what their day was like. And Nigerian nonprofits have been through military dictatorships. They've been through ethnic strife. They've been through lots of problems around governance and corruption. And it really is one of the things that has held the country together in terms of being a learning laboratory for citizenship, for democratic practice, and for leadership. And the Foundation Center is tremendously privileged and excited to be working with a series of organizations in Nigeria to try to create some kind of capacity building and information system that is appropriate for the growth of not just international but also domestic philanthropy and capacity building and resource building for nonprofits in Nigeria. And then the last place I want to sort of stop on my world tour is Baltimore. Earlier this week I was in Baltimore. It was a convening of the Hewlett Foundation. Now the Hewlett Foundation is right here in Menlo Park. It's one of the country's largest foundations. And the new president of the Hewlett Foundation, Larry Kramer, has announced an initiative called the Madison Initiative. The Madison Initiative has a very big goal, and that is essentially to try to end hyper-partisanship in American politics. Okay. They have decided that one of the biggest problems that is facing America is gridlock. That it seems that Congress and the political process is not really capable of policy making, not really capable of addressing the most pressing issues faced by the U.S. and faced by the world, and the partisanship is really the big, and specifically polarization is the way they phrase it, is the really big problem. So Hewlett convened a group of about 60 people representing grantee organizations. There were other funders there as well, the Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, and others. And this was really, there were two former members of Congress. There were the leading academics that studied democratic theory in the US, and the leading activists that are trying to do things like register voters, to fight the influence of money in politics, and basically try to make American democracy live up to its historic promise. It was an amazing 2 days. We were heavily facilitated. We were not given an agenda, which was kind of interesting. We were all asked to bring an artifact, and the first thing we had to do was show the artifact and why it was important to us. And predictably, some people brought the scale of justice, brought the Constitution, but I brought a picture of a paperweight from IBM which had the word think on it, because I grew up in a household where my father worked for IBM, and our house was full of all these IBM things that said think, which was the motto. And this is really sort of what got me into the line of work I'm in today. But what struck me about that meeting was, first of all, just the potential power of philanthropy and the power of nonprofit organizations to tackle really big issues. I mean, it's hard to think of an issue that is more complex and more difficult in this country than to try to figure out really how to get the political system to respond to people's needs. The second thing that struck me is there was sort of a tension in the room, and the tension was between a new generation of activists and a kind of war-weary, highly experienced group of veteran professionals who'd been in White House administrations, who'd been policymakers. And the latter kept talking about the importance of reinforcing the political parties, to bringing back strong leadership. And the young people are saying, you just don't get it. This isn't the 1960s. The whole notion of strong institutions is being turned inside out by network technology, by the way people are communicating with each other, the ways people participate, and whatever strong institutions we create in the future are going to look very different than the institutions that we relied upon in the past. They're going to be much more open institutions, they're going to be data and knowledge driven, and they're going to be networked. And this is what brings me to the Foundation Center, because this really is the kind of organization that we're trying to create. Now, we're really fortunate. I don't know if we're just lucky, but we're really fortunate because the core assets of the Foundation Center are unbelievably important and even cool in today's world. And we have tons of data. We have our own fair portion of introverted, geeky people, and geeks are like all of a sudden in, right? I mean, a lot of us when we were in high school, the guys that were carrying around the pocket things and the slide rules were not particularly cool. Now they are, right? Okay, so we have geeks that can actually code, can develop really great data interfaces for things. We have the ability to make sense out of information, which I think is something that's tremendously underrated. We're living in what Economist magazine calls a data deluge. Information is not the problem. Making sense out of the information and having context and perspective is. And this is something that I think the Foundation Center is good at and can still get a lot better at. And then I think we have outreach. It's kind of indicative in this world when getting together face to face is now referred to as, let's follow up on that offline. I mean, I find that whole phraseology I find kind of fascinating, right? Because the major way we relate to each other, we say this in the office. I mean, my colleagues can attest to this. We first sent emails to each other rather than just get up and go over and talk to each other. We do this all the time. We send emails and we copy a zillion people, and before you know it, you have this kind of like thousands of emails, and then you get back the email from somebody that says thanks, and you want to kill them, right? Because it's copied to 50 people because there's been this whole email change, and we could have done it in 10 minutes by talking to each other. So we don't get together enough offline. But what's really good about the Foundation Center is that we have a huge offline presence, which we're calling social sector outreach, and you're a fundamental part of that. I mean, we have our own field offices, which are in several strategic locations throughout the country. But this network of now over 400, I have to get up. I actually get up, I get up to my office and walk over to Keith and ask him, so how many funding information network partners do we have now? And today's answer is? 42. Okay, right. It varies, from week to week. But 482, and to be able to say, okay, we are a geeky organization with tons of data and knowledge, really good interfaces, great databases, but with a physical presence in 482 locations in 50 states, all 50 states, and in 13 countries around the world, is a very powerful combination. Because I don't think in today, my own prediction is that face-to-face connection and networking and meeting is poised for a huge comeback. And I think when you ally that with information, it's tremendously powerful. So in convening these kinds of meetings, the kind of planning that Zora and her team are doing to really energize and really develop the full potential of this network, we think the Foundation Center has the capability to build on a proud past, a really important past, and be much more in the future than it is today. And that's where we're heading. And it's in this country, and it's also around the world. The last thing I want to say, and then I want to open it up, is I can never tell the story about the origins of the Foundation Center too much, because it's what got me here. For those of you who heard it, I apologize. For those of you who haven't, it's a great story. But I was amazed how many people who even worked at the Foundation Center didn't necessarily know the story. And every time I've had to give talks, and I've told this story, people are electrified by it. And in Australia, I was able to put a quote up on this humongous screen, right? I was like an ant in front of it, and this big screen. And so there's this quote which basically said, I'm paraphrasing now, but I believe saying foundation, it's if we're doing our jobs, somebody's going to come to us and say, I have this idea, and it's going to get me into a lot of trouble, and if you support me, it's going to get us both into a lot of trouble, but I think we should do it. And then I put that up there, and then I asked people, who do you think said that? And nobody really has an idea. And then I show on the screen, it was Russell Leffingwell. Now, Russell Leffingwell, for those of you who are not immersed in Foundation Center history, was a Republican banker in 1952, and he was the chair of the Carnegie Foundation Board. And he was testifying before a McCarthy-era hearing accusing foundations of supporting communism. And he had the courage to get up there and say, yeah, if we're doing our job, people are going to come to us who have ideas that are going to get them in trouble, and we're going to be supporting them, and we're going to get in trouble because that's what we should be doing. And he also said that we believe the foundation should have glass pockets, which was the quote which was actually used at the founding of the Foundation Center in 1956. And we were created as a response to these congressional hearings during McCarthyism about foundation activity. We were created to be a public information service because our founding fathers, as it were, understood the power of information and the power of data to work against secrets and accusation. And that's a really, really important thing. It was important then, it's always been important, but it's even more important today. And the kind of information that you're able to equip people with, and that we're able to equip people with, really gives them power. And in today's world, the more access that people have to more information, the better chance they have of getting into trouble. So thank you. So I just want to open it up. You've been hearing lots of things and seeing presentations and technical glitches and all. I know you saw the new mapping tool, and there were a few glitches, but it still worked out okay. So I'm just throwing it open. Anything you have on your minds? Also virtual audience as well. Comments, questions, observations? Yeah. I think you need to step up to this mic.
Use the mic at the end of the table. Thank you.
Good morning.
Yeah.
My question is asking you to use your imagination, and if you could do at the Foundation Center anything, sky's the limit, money's no object, what would be your dream for the Foundation Center.
All right. That's a good one. Okay. This is usually when, the moderator says, well, let's take a few questions first, and then we'll, no. So, all right. This sounds a little crazy, but I kind of think I'm doing it. Okay. I worked in philanthropy for years. I worked for something called the Inter-American Foundation, which was actually a foundation. How many of you, this is really going to date me, but it'll date you too if you raise your hands, but that's okay. How many of you remember the Alliance for Progress? Okay, good. That was basically a foreign aid program where, the U.S. was going to ally with South America for progress. This was sort of against the backdrop of the Cold War, but it was, we were going to prove how good of friends we could be to Latin America. And a whole bunch of loans were made for these big development programs. And there was Dante Fascell, who was a Congress member from Florida, and Brad Morris, who was a member of Congress who later went on to found the United Nations Development Program, went on a trip to Latin America and to visit all these projects that had been funded by the Alliance for Progress, and came back totally depressed because they realized that most of the money had been absorbed by Latin American governments or absorbed by U.S. government bureaucracies, and virtually none of it had reached the poor. So they created a foundation called the Inter-American Foundation, which nothing ever like it has ever been created again, probably never will be, but it was funded by Congress, but had total freedom, had no earmarking. It just got a bunch of money every year. And it was supposed to directly fund grassroots organizations in Latin America. So that's where I started doing philanthropy. And I went to the Ford Foundation from there, and then to a foundation in Switzerland, the Oak Foundation. So I worked a lot on the giving side of philanthropy. When this job became available, first, I read that story about the MacArthur-era hearings and just realized how brilliant the idea had been to create this organization, and it really got me excited. And the second thing is, I also realized, almost in kind of an embarrassed way, that although we think of the Foundation Center really as something that helps nonprofits get foundation grants, I also realized how embarrassing it was that I made grants for years. I never used any of the Foundation Center information. And just the tremendous wealth and potential of that information to help the people that are making decisions about grants to be more intelligent. Because the two things that grant makers, foundations, had the most difficulty answering is, well, who else is funding what I'm funding? They don't know that. And the way they usually find out is they call up the grantee and ask them who else is funding you. But they don't go into a database and get it. And the other thing, they all said, how do I know what other foundations know? Foundations are very isolated from one another, so how do they actually learn so they don't repeat the same mistakes, so they have more efficiency and more effectiveness? So, coming into the job, it was like this gold mine of information that needed to be harnessed to continue to make it available to nonprofits and other types of social sector organizations that needed resources, but also begin to think how to put out that information in a way to improve the practice of philanthropy, and really make it, be more than the sum of its parts. Right now, it's kind of sounds maybe harsh to say this, but philanthropy is functioning as less than the sum of its parts. 86,000 independent foundations in the United States, right? $780 billion in assets, about $57 billion a year in giving. It's atomized. There's a lot of duplication. Foundations are sort of rushing into areas like they've never been funded before when they have been funded, and there's lots of stuff that's known about it. So, trying to sort of answer these really classic questions about how you make this large field live up to all its potential and its promise really is my dream. Beyond that, I suppose if all the top engineers at Google would tomorrow leave and come work for us for free. That'd be great. Or if, the Gates Foundation or someone would say, it's really great. You have a good business model and all that stuff. You have a subscription database, but what if we just gave you, like enough endowment money to fund your whole operation? You could make all the stuff free. That would be kind of nice. But that's probably not going to happen. So, but I think the short answer is, I think this is, sort of the dream, and because I just see an enormous amount of potential, and I think, the real challenge in jobs like this is, how you keep your eye on a dream and a vision, but realize that, it takes, I don't want to say it takes a village, because that's like a Hillary, right? But I mean, it takes, it really takes a community of people and professionals and organizations to do that. And people have their own pace, people deal with change in their own ways, and there's a tremendous amount of challenge and satisfaction from trying to sort of bring people along together towards a really kind of aspirational set of goals. So, because we have very big goals. I mean, you've seen our 2020 goals. They're these huge things like, build a global data platform for philanthropy, encourage foundations to be more transparent. I mean, there's lots of things that are huge, huge goals. So we're not short on aspiration. So, any other questions or comments or? Yeah, I think you have.
Morning, Brad. Lydia
Yeah.
Towery from Charlotte.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Nice to see you too. What's been on my mind a lot that I think plays into what you've just discussed is it occurs to me that at a local level, grant makers, givers, foundations may not understand that they've got to fund a collection in their neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And, Charlotte has a very unique situation where we inherited a nonprofit center that had been run by a foundation who understood the importance of giving those people they could not fund a referral, a place to go for more information so that they could find somebody who would fund them. Yeah. Okay? That I've had a conversation with them, and that's kind of was always their fundamental philosophy, and that to me is terrific.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if the FINs and the foundation centers can partner to create a more active rather than passive means of communication plan for reaching out to local foundations who we are indeed partners with, even if it's kind of a silent partnership, so that they know, if of course we understand you can't fund everybody, but please make sure you refer those people to the local fin. Yeah. I think we assume that people do that, but I don't think they do it. And I think your comments would tend to reinforce my belief in that. Yeah. Because in my case, I would almost like that foundation that supports us, which is the Duke Endowment, to be a model.
All right.
Them sort of getting a certification, gold standard, and other foundations could follow suit by at least knowing where their closest nonprofit resource center is to refer, and maybe down the line think about small amounts to support the collection. Because certainly, we don't expect one foundation to support every fin in the country. That doesn't make sense. Yeah. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Has this been talked about before? Thank you.
Yeah. I think the technical answer is sort of. Okay. We've talked about it. What's kind of fascinating about philanthropy is that, this is a highly segmented industry, right? At the top end, you've got the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Seattle, which just built this new. Is anybody from Seattle here? No. Okay. This fantastic new campus, and has 1,300 employees or 1,400 employees. Gives out $3 billion plus a year. And then at the other end, you've literally got a husband and wife and a checkbook, and an accountant. So you have about, I think something like 975 foundations with over $100 million in assets. Those are the big ones. And then you have tens of thousands of small foundations, and most of those are hyper-local. I mean, they're funding, it could be as small as a city, it could be as small as a county, or it could be, several counties. And, I think intuitively we've always felt the strength of the Fin network, and we've thought of it, I think, we thought of it more from this perspective of access of nonprofits to information than I think, more strategically about, well, what is the relationship between the Fin and foundations around it. We started to change that. We've been asking our own staff as they visit Fins to actually visit local foundations and say, hey, we're in your backyard, and we're here to serve, and you can send your grantees and things like that. And you might think of, funding the Fin, and but we're just sort of at the early stages of that. But I mean, these are exactly the kind of ideas we need, I think, to get from the network, because this is the strength of a network. It's great to say, yeah, we're present in all 50 states, but what does that really mean? And we're not just present in 50 states, and we're present in lots of places in those states, and a lot of those places are not, the kind of places that you hear, rolling off the tongue of the Gates Foundation or the Ford Foundation. I mean, this is where there's a lot of need, a lot of energy, and a lot of opportunity for resource mobilization and interaction. And I think we need to do exactly the kind of thing you're talking about, that to let local foundations know, first of all, that this is something we're supporting. We're supporting, for the sort of the narrow interest that, I had this, I remember the one year at the Ford Foundation where we counted everything that we could reasonably describe as a request for funding. Email, proposal, letter of intent, all that kind of stuff, was 144,000. And in that year we made, I think, 1,900 grants. So, basically what you spend your time doing when you're a program officer is not really, thinking great thoughts and figuring out how to cure cancer. You're basically saying no. And there's nothing you like more when you're a funder than to be able to say, we get lots of great proposals, this is no judgment on your own, but you've heard all that, you've seen these. But, maybe, perhaps you could go over here. And the Foundation Center is really convenient for that. I think I've told some of you before, we have like a famous rejection letter of our own, where it's a form letter, but we were actually referred to the Foundation Center to find funding. So, and it was really funny because it was for DC, and it has the header which has the DC address, blah blah blah, and then like in case we didn't get it, it actually in the body of the letter it repeats the address of the office in DC. So it was a form letter. Yeah, it's a good thing, but I think it goes beyond that. I don't think it should be sort of like a dumping ground for it's a good place to find resources, but it's a good place to get lots of kinds of information on being a nonprofit. And I think one of the great things that you're able to do for nonprofits is both, I think you kind of give them both a measure of hope and a dose of reality. Because, there's a lot of people that, I don't know, I lost my job, I'm going to go create a nonprofit, or I had this great idea, so, the Gates Foundation will give me a grant. And I think, when they get into it and you lead them into it and you show them the stuff, well, it's not that easy and it's a lot of work. And so I think that the hope and the reality is a really important thing. So I think there's, more than just grant information we give people. So, but I agree, totally. There's another?
We have a couple questions from the virtual audience.
Great, okay.
A lot of positive feedback. They loved your reference to the world, and they also loved the story about getting into trouble from Catherine in Knoxville and Marlise Lean from Iowa. Michael from Ukiah, California wants to know, can you share your thoughts about the new cost allocation rules for nonprofits? Do you think this will have a positive or negative effect on philanthropy?
Okay, well, it's hard because this is a virtual question, but I'm assuming this is about new OMB regulations around allowable overhead. I think that's what it probably refers to. There's been a pretty strong movement among actually people in government and groups like GuideStar and the National Association Council for Nonprofits, Charity Navigator, and others. There's a national overhead campaign, and we participated, the Foundation Center participated in an organizing meeting for this. But it's pushing back on the notion that that there should be artificially low overhead rates that are built into federal grants and contracts and also foundations grants. Because there's the conventional wisdom is that, well, we know that the largest single source of income for nonprofits in the U.S. is government. Now, this surprises a lot of people, right? They don't think that, but it's true. It's government because there's a lot of, sort of subcontracting, as it were, of services now that's being done at state and local level. There's a feeling that actually nonprofits end up losing money by getting government money because the allowable overhead rates are actually significantly lower than what it costs the nonprofits to actually run those programs in terms of overhead costs. That coupled with the fact that, as there's more congressional oversight and more reports of scandal and corruption, the administrative requirements that the government places on those nonprofits in terms of accounting and auditing is that, further increases their own administrative overhead, and they're not getting paid for it. So I know there's been OMB has sort of come out with new regulations on this, which increase. I don't know exactly where the final numbers are on this. And there's sort of a movement within philanthropy, but the thing is there's no such thing as the Office of Management and Budget for philanthropy. Foundations are independent organizations, and they will make their own determinations about overhead. And there's a wide range in practice from foundations that will fund no overhead to foundations that cap it at 10%, to foundations that are very open about it. But there's no standard overhead rate for foundations, and I think the most you can expect with foundations is to sort of try to create a movement within philanthropy and greater dialogue among foundations, and especially between foundations and their grantees, about what is reasonable. And the way this is being framed in this campaign is if you want impact and you want results, you have to pay for them. And one of the ways you pay for results is through reasonable overhead rates. So I hope that's what the question was.
Yeah, he replied. He said that's exactly what he was talking about. Connie Harris from Solano Community Foundation in Fairfield, California. She says, please describe the benefits you see for Fin Partners and MicroEdge as a result of the Blackbaud acquisition of MicroEdge.
Wow, it's like a White House press question. Yeah, I think it's too early to tell. Blackbaud is a private for-profit company. I think it has about $1 billion market cap. I forget how many thousand employees. Their main line of business is actually business software, but they do have sort of a nonprofit service division. They are the owners of the Razor's Edge product, which is the most widely used fundraising software by nonprofits. They bought another fundraising software a while back, and now they've bought MicroEdge, which produces GIFs and fins, which are the leading grants management software programs in terms of market penetration used by foundations and community foundations. That said, there's no such thing as market dominance when it comes to fundraising software among foundations, because it is such a highly individualistic, endowed network with relatively low regulatory requirements. So I think MicroEdge has about 1,600 clients or so, and there's over 80,000 foundations, but it has the largest number. Historically, foundations, I think, have had kind of a love-hate relationship with GIFs software of MicroEdge. I think partly that's because of the nature of the market. The market's not big enough to have really, really great software. And once the foundation president was saying, well, what would it take to have really great grants management software? And I said, well, would you be willing to pay $500,000 for it? They said, of course not. So, well, that's the problem, because there's no scale in the market. You really can't have a really fantastic product at a price point that most people would be willing to pay. So I think the hope is that with Blackbaud and all their resources, they are able to make it a much bigger, bigger and better and more efficient product. I think the Blackbaud's history of acquisitions, like all acquisitions, has not been entirely smooth. I mean, there's, when you acquire another company, it's, I don't know, it's like merging libraries, merging nonprofits, merging foundations. There's a cultural process you go through. So it's hard to tell, actually. Time will tell whether it's a better product. We have a relationship with Microsoft, and the initial signals we're getting, which is kind of what you'd expect, is that it's going to be this, everything will be fine, that the collaboration will exist, that the kinds of import and export of data that we do already with MicroEdge will continue. So I think only time will tell.
Thank you. Another question from Annan from St. Peters, Missouri. Have you considered adding civic organization information to foundation maps, meaning information on Rotaries and Kiwanis? One of the challenges faced by many small organizations is finding international partners. Civic organizations hold a lot of the grassroots information that is necessary for community analysis.
No, it's an interesting idea. The one place we did some of that, there's a platform we developed which is available for free. If you go to a website of something called Media Impact Funders, this is an affinity group of foundations that fund media. It used to be called, I think, Filmmakers and Electronic something, and I don't know, but they changed their name. Everybody's changing their name now, so they changed their name to Media Impact Funders. And we produced a free data visualization tool which shows foundation funding for media. But we also, in collaboration with GuideStar, we put on that same platform all that they could pull from their databases of nonprofits working in the media space, regardless of whether or not they were getting foundation grants. So unlike our own things, which show basically it sort of starts with the foundations and follows to the recipients, this has both on it. It has the foundations that are funding media nonprofits, those nonprofits that are getting the foundation grants, and then a wider universe of nonprofits that are working on media. Because the whole idea was sort of to show people, where the money's going and where it's not going. And it's searchable by all sorts of subcategories of media, so you can begin to see who the other groups are. I don't know, this sounds more like kind of a network mapping question and whatnot, and I think to invest in that broadly, that's like a huge thing to do, to sort of map all the nonprofits in the in the world, and do network visualizations and everything. That's the kind of thing that we would probably first build into a topical platform on something. Let's say it was on immigration, or it was on civic leadership, or on democracy or something, where we could experiment in doing that with a smaller universe for an actual partner or customer, rather than just try to do it. One of the I think one of the great potentials of the information world we live in is also one of its greatest challenges, is that if you can't figure out exactly what question you're trying to answer, or what piece of information you need, I mean, this from libraries, right? You can collect information forever. And because the technology is getting so good, and storage is no longer a capacity. When my father worked for IBM, right? I mean, the computer he was, go to the office to work at, which is as big as this room, was an IBM 360. And now my watch probably has as much computing power as that IBM 360. So you don't even need storage, big storage anymore, or you can store it in somebody else's cloud, So there is the tendency, well, let's just collect all the information we can collect, but it's expensive to collect information because you have to clean it, you have to structure it, you have to store it in databases, and then you have to build ways to search it. So, I guess the short answer is we would try to find, if there was a specific need somebody had in a specific area to do that, we would try to find a way to go after that information.
We have one final question from Darlene Richards from the Rochester Public Library. She wants to know, she wants to understand more of the experience of the Foundation Center as to how we began to make the case to grant makers as to why it was important to keep their information up to date. She wants to understand this because she wants to know how she can make the case to her local funders, as to why the Foundation Center collections is important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, this is one of the most difficult question to answer in today's world is what's your value proposition? It's a very difficult question to answer for foundations. For people coming to foundations, because you're sitting in a foundation, and I guess you're going to hear from a group of grant makers now, so you'll hear it firsthand, but lots of people are coming to you with lots of great ideas that they want you to fund. And one of the things you're trying to figure out in your mind is, well, what is their value proposition? What's unique about this? What's the real value? To go to foundations and say your information needs to be current usually doesn't get them to leap up off their chairs and run to their IT departments and their grants administrative departments, say, clean up that data and get it to the Foundation Center as fast as you can. And then to make sort of the circuitous argument that, well, if your information is more up to date, then the nonprofits that use Foundation Directory Online will have a better idea of what your priorities are and what your procedures are, and therefore they will, more tailor their grant proposal. That's kind of long in a soundbite world. And some of them might say, well, they can just go to our website. The reality is, and this is a shocking figure, but 93% of foundations in the United States do not have websites. It's kind of amazing, but it's true. We checked it. We checked the entire database. And the foundations over 100 million in assets, which I said before is about 975 foundations, 30% of them do not have websites. 30% of the foundations with assets over 100 million. So there's, you can't go to some websites. The way that we have found that most convinces foundations to give us up-to-date information is basically three things. One is to make it easy for them to do it. Okay, so there's an electronic updater system. Okay, the second is through sort of creative and constructive competition by creating some kind of prestige around being part of a transparency movement by electronically exporting your data to the Foundation Center. And a growing body, there's about 900 foundations do that, and actually 18 foundations in the US are actually streaming their data to us in almost real time, and we're making it available as an open, completely open data, machine-readable feed. And there's a certain kind of procedure on that. But the really biggest way we've been doing it is through issues. So when we build something on blackmail achievement, we build something on access to safe water, we build something on democracy funding, and we work with a group of funders to say, well, let's really define what that means, and let's get your data aligned. The first thing they say is, well, yeah, but why is the latest data on here 2011? And we have a chance then to explain to them, well, that data's from 2011 because you have up to a year after your fiscal year closes to file your 990. As a program officer, you probably don't even see the 990, okay? And you'd be surprised if you did, because a lot of times, the name of the grantee's incorrect or it's misspelled, there's no grant description, there's all sorts of stuff that goes on in there. That goes to the IRS. Even if you file it electronically, the IRS turns it into a TIFF file, means it takes a picture of it. It ships off those to GuideStar and the Foundation Center in big boxes of DVD-ROMs every month. And then the Foundation Center has to convert them into searchable PDFs and manually key in information. And then it has to code it, clean it, and code it. And that's why the grant that you made in 2011 is just hitting a database today. But when we're working on issues like that, with a relatively, small group of foundations, it gives the opportunity to say, you want your data to be current? There's a way to do it. You just have to give it to us, and give it to us in this format, and they do. Because there's a value proposition there. You're producing something which helps foundations see what each other is doing on an issue they care about, and to identify other funders they didn't even know were working in this space. So we come at it from a lot of different directions, but there's no magic bullet for this. I mean, you just can't put out a press release, or say, funders, make your data current, and they're going to, they're going to line up at the door. It's not going to happen. So you have to find different ways to do it. So.
Do we have time for one more?
I think there's one here
Is
from the
there
audience.
one?
Yeah.
Well,
we
go
do.
ahead, go ahead,
Yeah.
and then we'll do it.
We have to.
Oh,
We have time. Yeah. We have time. So.
My name's Olivia Bravo, and I'm with Charleston, West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
We in West Virginia have 8 fins, and we're all on the boundaries of the state, pretty much. There are certain areas, geographical areas, that are really hard to get to. They also are economically more depressed than most of our areas,
Yeah.
and they still have an interest in having a foundation center because they're quite frankly the ones that need it most.
Yeah.
But in order for them to get to one of us, it can be a minimum of maybe 50 miles over hill and dale and through water and all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah.
Has there been any thought to allowing these smaller areas a lower subscription rate to the foundation center?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I honestly don't know the answer to that question. We've had criteria traditionally by which we've tried to choose fins. Obviously, we don't want them stacked on each other in the same geographic area. We look for, a certain service population to make it viable. But, I think you're raising a really interesting point. I mean, if you wanted to basically be in places which are low density places with long commutes, that you might have to have a different cost structure. But, that's something I think you'd follow up with Zora and Kifan, but something we have to think about, so.
We do have another question from the virtual audience. Michael from Ukiah, California. Sorry about mispronouncing earlier. He wants to know how you see the future of the Foundation Center and the Funding Information Network program. Do you see it more like a library or a management support organization / nonprofit resource center?
Sort of a hybrid of those two. I mean, I think I see it as an information hub. And, when I think about libraries, I basically, I wrote a blog once, and actually what it came from was networking days in Cleveland, where it was a librarian from, I think she was Iowa. She got up and she said, look, I work in a county which is completely taken over by the Tea Party. They passed a law that says no new taxes without a supermajority, which means we have no new taxes. And a fireman came in the other day and said, how do I raise money for a fire truck? And I was just thinking, is this what America's come to? You can't even raise money for a fire truck, But it also got me to thinking. I said, these, librarians are like the original data scientists, right? I mean, now everybody wants to be a data scientist, and putting data scientists in their card. But you are people that are just incredibly skilled at organizing, searching, and finding information and showing people how to get there. So I guess I don't see it sort of as, library as opposed to nonprofit service center. I think being a knowledge hub for the social sector is about helping people find the information they need as fast as they can, and the information that's directly relevant to them. And I think some of that still comes through sort of a more traditional library search process, but others of it is coming through different kinds of electronic interfaces and database, archive training material. So I really think, I think probably more, if I was going to pick the two options, more sort of for a multi-content, social sector resource center and kind of hub. So I think that over here there was, you had a question? Yeah, okay.
Actually, I don't have a question, but I wanted
comment?
to relate something that happened to me day before yesterday that I think brought home to me that it's not about global networks and people working with computers, and it's about people helping individuals. A taxi driver was bringing me from Sausalito, and he asked me why I was here, and I told him, and expecting him not to have even heard of the Foundation Center, and he said, those people changed my life.
Wow.
He said, I worked with them for 3 months, and he didn't go into details about what his concern was, but he said, they completely changed my life.
Wow.
And I'm hoping to go to them with another project soon. So, it's not all about ideas and huge funding, and it's about the people who work in this building.
Yeah.
I was very impressed with it.
No, I have another story like that. It's interesting. There's a guy named Andy Sharpless, who's the CEO of Oceana, which was the first large NGO devoted only to ocean issues. He was an executive at Real Networks. He was at the White House at one point, but he started his life as a community organizer. I was talking to him once, and I knew him when he was a grantee of mine at Oak Foundation at Oceana. And I told him I was going to the Foundation Center job. He said, that's really interesting, because when I started out in my career as a community organizer, I went to the Foundation Center. It's the first place I went, and that's where I discovered hope.
Wow.
And it's such a strong, because I realized that I had this really crazy idea. I thought nobody would be interested in it, and I started to look through all the information. I said, well, my gosh, there's people out there that are actually interested in this, and I think that's kind of the empowerment can come. It's not an ATM machine, right? I mean, people aren't going to come, and they're not going to go into the Foundation Center or a funding information network partner and walk out with a check. But they will get the idea that, hey, maybe I'm not so crazy after all, that, there might be somebody who might back this idea. And it is sort of that line I gave from Russell Leffingwell, that I have this idea, and, maybe somebody will back me to do it. And that's a pretty powerful thing in a world where, a lot of conventional ideas are sort of stillborn. People are basically told all the reasons it won't work, or they can't do it, or shouldn't do it, or shouldn't even dream. So, yeah, I agree. I think it's incredibly important. And that's why, another way to run the funding information network system would basically just to have people sign up, to have a computer terminal. And there'd be some empty room with a computer terminal sitting in the middle of it. But the model is to have a staffed, resourced center, which I think is challenging for library budgets and community foundation budgets, but I think it's absolutely essential. You want to have a person to connect to, not just a piece of data. Any other one?
None from the virtual audience.
Anything else from anybody? Hopes? Why doesn't, I don't want to put you on the spot, but would you answer that same question for your own work? About what's your dream for your own work? Yeah. Oh, Keith told me it's 15. Okay.
I'll answer
All right.
it very quickly.
Yeah.
My dream for my own work is, since I'm at a university in a fairly wealthy part of my state, is that everybody knows that we're there, that including all the faculty and researchers who are looking for funding, all the nonprofits in the region know we're there, and see us as a destination. I think one of our issues is that they don't know we're there as hard as we try to let them know. People don't know until they realize, I need money. Where can I get it? I don't know. And because they heard something 3 months ago and they've forgotten it. So that would be my dream, is just to have such a high awareness in the community that it's just the first thing they think of is to come to us.
Okay, well, that's a good note to end on. Thanks a lot. Okay, I'll wrap you.